Heavy Zahir, you should be careful. Heavy Zahir, you should be careful. This is the second thing that Rabbi Yehuda said. So the first thing he said is, what is the straight path that a person should take in Torah and mitzvahs? Something that's good for him and good from others. Number one. Number two, we're Pirkei Sheni. Here you can, yeah. Heavy Zahir b'mitzvah kala kabachamura. She'ein ata yodea matan schara shel mitzvos. Heavy mechashev hefsed mitzvah keneged schara v'schar avera keneged hefseda. What did he say? Be careful in even light commandments, simple commandments, that you do not know the reward for the commandments. You should reckon the loss that you get from a commandment opposite its reward. And the reward you get from doing a sin compared to its loss. Good? With me? Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, one of the most genius people that ever lived, give this advice. Be careful in simple commandments like valuable commandments. Like, how do you say, precious commandments. Chamura. And translated, the light commandments should be just as important to you as the heavy commandments. Because you don't know the reward for a commandment. You with me or not? No? This is the first Mishnah of the second paragraph. Okay? What are you doing? You know? Here, see? Which is the straight way? I'll tell you this. See, here it is. Again, you should be careful with a light commandment, like with a heavy commandment. Okay, that's another way of translating it. That you don't know the reward for the commandments. No one knows what the reward. It could be that a simple commandment has a bigger reward, and a heavy one has a little reward. Okay, of course you're going to ask another question. Who cares about the reward anyway? But let's see. Especially, who cares about the reward if you don't know what the reward is? Could be that you could do a big, huge commandment. You make 1,000 people do tshuva, right? And it could be there's no little reward. Big deal. And one morning you fix the mezuzah in your house, and it's the biggest reward. So it says you should be careful in all of them. And you should consider what is the loss if you don't do a commandment compared to the reward if you do a sin. Right? You do a sin, it could be very pleasurable, and you could get a lot of praise from it. And famous people, religious Jews, that in order to be on stage and get fame, they left everything. Perform on Shabbos, tens of thousands of people clapping their hands, cheering for them. You don't get that in shul. Shul, something you don't even get called up to you have to wait in line for the toilet. Here they have. Yeah.
Everybody wants to shake my hand.
What you give. Why? Because you give $100 or something? You give.
Yeah, wants to shake my hand.
They hope you're going to give money. You do, it's known. Oh, here we go. Yeah, let's see. Base. I'm sorry. Okay. You have to be careful with light commandments like heavy ones, because you don't know the difference between one commandment or another, and you should consider the reward for doing a sin compared to the loss, and the reward for the loss of not doing a commandment according to its reward. Let's see what he's talking about. It means like this. The reason that the Torah does not tell us about commandments, I mean, very interesting. If you look in the Jewish Bible, it does not say anywhere that if you do these commandments, you're going to go to heaven. Heaven is the biggest reward you could possibly imagine. There is no pleasure in this world, even if you rolled up all of the pleasures in the world, right, all the pleasures you could possibly imagine in this world, it doesn't equal even 1 second of pleasure in the world to come. Doesn't say that. Of doing a commandment. No, that's a very poor advertising. God should have written in the Torah, if you do my commandments, you know how good it feels to win $1 million, $1 billion, to be king of the world. Well, you do one commandment, it's even higher. Oh, that's very nice. Right. That's pretty much the best. You get the rains in their time, you have oil and wine. What a person doesn't like wine? What am I going to do with oil? I don't, sad. What are you going to do with the oil? The sands, you get early rain, you get late rain. I don't get it. I live in New York. I hope there's never rain. I don't like the rain. But it's not just a big deal. So that's all the reward that you get. That doesn't sort of make any sense. What about heaven? Come on, God, you have heaven up there. You can give me. Now, it even reached to the point that there were the people, we'll see in Pirkei Avot, there were the people, the Sadukim, and said that there's no such thing as heaven. It doesn't exist. There's no afterlife. There's just this life and that's it. You just do what you do, and that's it. Maybe the most meaningful thing is doing the Torah of mitzvahs, but as far as the afterworld, after this life, you live and then you die and that's it. You're finished. Once in a while, maybe there's reruns. It's the opposite. Is in America, there's reruns if the program was good. The program is good, they make reruns. Here in Judaism, you get reruns if you weren't good. Right? You didn't do what you were supposed to, you get reincarnated. So there's reruns. But that doesn't say that in the Torah either. It doesn't say anything about Gilgulim and. So what's going on over here? None of that. Listen, it's not really understood what Rabbi Yehuda said. What did he say? You should be careful with an easy commandment, a light commandment, like a heavy one, because you don't know the reward of mitzvah. But what, if so, why did he call them light and heavy? If it's a light commandment and a heavy commandment, it seems there is a difference. And then he says, but you don't know the reward for a light one and a heavy one. So it seems there is no difference. So what's going on over here? Why call them light? Just say, be careful with all the commandments. But it doesn't say that. It says, be careful with the light commandments like the heavy commandments. So there are light and heavy commandments. Let's see. It means to say that therefore there is not written anywhere in the Torah what the reward for the commandments is. Interestingly enough, it is written very clearly, and maybe a little bit too clearly, what the punishment for doing bad is. There's Parshas Bechukosai and Parshas Kitavo, and there it talks about the 49 curses, and then later on the 98 curses that the Jews get if they don't do what Hashem says. No? Okay, but at least they have one chapter that tells a couple of good things you get, except for the oil and the wine. Why should you be careful? We should be careful with why doesn't it tell us a little bit about the reward, so that we should be careful in an easy commandment like a hard commandment, and so that we would be able to consider what is the loss of a commandment. If we don't do a commandment, what's the loss against the reward of just sort of taking it easier and not doing it? Even though the Torah did not let us know what are the reward for the commandments, but we can learn it from the punishment. So therefore, a person will over what the punishment that reaches a person. There are certain punishments that if you transgress, the person gets killed by the court. Some you get killed by God. Some you get only lashes. Some you just have to pay money, right? Some God doesn't like you. It says the charon off, the God. There's different commandments. There's different punishments. But according to this, we have a question in the end. So we know that there is a reward for the commandments. So if so, what does it say? You do not know the reward for the commandments. We do know. Just look and see what is the punishment if you don't do, and you know which ones are heavy and which ones are not. How is it possible to demand from a person that he should be careful from an easy commandment where there's very little punishment, and the same care that he should take from commandments that do have a punishment, a big punishment? Therefore, we have to say that the reward for the mitzvahs, there's two things. There's a reward according to the punishment, and this reward there's a difference between a big mitzvah and a small mitzvah. Some mitzvahs are, a person doesn't keep Shabbat, for instance, so that's punishable by death. A person that doesn't keep Yom Kippur, it's not punishable by death by the court. It's only punishable death from heaven, etc. So you can make, and then there's the punishments that are only punishable by flogging. On this, it says you should, so there are certain things, rewards, that you can know by the punishments, because those are stated clearly. This, it says, you should consider the reward, the gain of a commandment against the loss. A great gain, which you should know that in it there is no difference between one commandment or another. Why? Because the easiest of the mitzvahs and all the light ahead of the mitzvahs, their reward is the same. Therefore, you have to be careful. What does this mean? The reward is the same. We see that the punishment is different. Why would the reward be the same? Right? A person washes his hands in the morning when he wakes up, puts it next to his bed. But it doesn't say in the Torah you have to do anything like that. On the other hand, a person on Shabbat doesn't slaughter his ox on Shabbat. It says you get the same reward. Well, here this guy is he's withholding himself. He's starving to death, and he doesn't slaughter his ox, right? He doesn't slaughter his ox. Or he says, I'm really hungry, I will slaughter my ox. He says the reward and the punishment for that is the same thing as if a person washes his hands in the morning, which is only a custom. How could that be? It doesn't make any sense. It says the explanation is like this. In the commandments, there are two different aspects. One aspect is that all of the commandments are exactly the same. Why? Because they're all the will of God. In this, there's no difference between one commandment and another, even a custom. And therefore, but then there's another aspect of the commandments. Every commandment purifies a person. Every commandment has a different type of purification that it purifies the person. There are commandments you do with your arms, commandments you do with your legs, commandments to do with your heart, commandments that are very difficult to do. Those have a different purification. Each commandment in this is different. So in every commandment, there's two aspects. One aspect is that every commandment is the will of God. In that way, they're all the same. And the other one is that every single commandment is totally different from every other commandment. Why? Because each commandment corresponds to another limb of a person, and each one has a different purifying ability. These two things are two types of reward. One reward is purifying the world. That's limited. This limited. And this one mitzvah is different from another one. There are some mitzvahs which fix up the world more and some which fix up the world less. Therefore, we see from the punishment what the reward for doing these mitzvahs are. The greater, the higher the mitzvahs is, the greater the punishment. Why? Because it makes a greater blemish in the world if you don't do it. So therefore, the punishment is even greater. That's the aspect of the mitzvahs that fixes up the world. So in the mitzvahs we have two things. Number one, you're doing the will of God. And number two, you're fixing up the world. As far as fixing up the world goes, every mitzvah is different. As far as doing the will of God goes, every commandment is the same. Therefore, as far as fixing up the world goes, there's some commandments that have more power and some have less. That you can tell by the different punishments that there are for the commandments. Some have big punishments and some have small. But then there's the other aspect of the commandments, namely that all the commandments are exactly the same. Each commandment is the will of God. It's doing a finite thing for the infinite creator. Because the will of God is equal in all of the commandments. It's God himself, who is infinite, wants you to do this thing. What difference does it make if it's big or it's small? To you, maybe it's big or small. But the difference between Hashem, right? The difference between them, let's even mathematically, the difference between infinity and a billion is the same difference between infinity and one. A billion is not closer to infinity than one is closer to infinity, or zero. It doesn't make any difference. Which is not the case in the mitzvah, which it is. This mitzvah is above all limitations. On this, it says, schar mitzvah mitzvah. The reward for a commandment is just the fact that you did what God said. The reward of a mitzvah is a mitzvah. That, because the word mitzvah means connection. There, on this aspect of every commandment, that it's the will of God, every single commandment is exactly the same. It's all the will of God. And if you don't do it, it's like rebelling against God, no matter how small it is, no matter how big it is. By means of doing the will of God, it joins the person with God, because God and his will are one. So if the king comes into a town and some simple peasant spits at the king, he gets the same punishment as if the chief of the whatever it is, his head advisor, right, advises the king in a improper way, purposely. He becomes a traitor. This person becomes a traitor to the king, right? One of his high advisors that he trusted, he gets killed. Somebody in the street spits at the king, also gets killed. It doesn't make any difference if it's a big damage or a small damage. You can't rebel against the king. On the other hand, somebody who does a good thing for the king, right? A simple person in the street yells out, "Long live the king, I love the king." Oh, the king could get pleasure from him, just like he gets from the big minister. Exactly the same. It's the will of the king. In that way, all the commandments are the same. But that's how the relation of the person to God and the God to the commandments and the commandments to the person, etc. All of them are the same. They're all the will of God. But if we're talking about how the commandments fix up the world, that's really the purpose of the commandments. The essence of the commandments, they come from God. But the purpose of the commandments is that the commandments come to fix up the world. That each and every commandment is different. And that, where every commandment is different, that's what it says. You don't know the reward for the commandments. That's talking about the essence of the commandments. There's some commandments that are heavy and there's some commandments that are light. Externally, that's the way they seem, how they fix up the world. There's some commandments that are heavy and some commandments are light. Commandments, positive. Also, if you don't do what God says, same thing, right? Same thing. If you don't do what God says you should do, then there's different punishments for different things. That you missed the opportunity, that's in relation to God's essence. You did not connect to God. Also, you're right, yes, 100%, you're right. If you didn't do the commandment, you're missing a fixing of the world also. Okay, so in other words, there's two aspects of the commandments. One aspect of the commandments, you cannot possibly know the reward of the commandments because every commandment is the same. It's a connection to the infinite God, whether it's a big commandment or a small commandment. But on the other hand, there's another aspect of the commandment, you can know the difference. So therefore it says, be careful in a big, heavy commandment like a small commandment. There are big commandments and there are small commandments as far as how they fix up the world. But be careful with them equally, because there's another aspect of all the commandments, that all the commandments are exactly equal. They're all the will of God.
Those are the same, two different people who do the same commandment. It's a big thing. The other guy, it's a small thing.
Okay, could be. Here we're not saying that. There are certain commandments that have a big effect on the world. Those are called big commandments. If a person does not do those commandments, it has a big damage to the world. On this, you can know the reward and the punishment. Right? That every commandment is like that. From the punishment, you have to keep Shabbos. Right? You have to keep the Shabbos. A person that does not keep Shabbos, he wrecks up the whole world. It's a connection between him and God. It ruins the whole world. Right? Eating milk and meat together. Eating milk and meat together is forbidden if they were boiled together. Boiling milk and meat together is also forbidden. The punishment is only getting lashes. It's not such a big punishment. Listen, there's a positive commandment that you have to keep the Shabbat, right? If you do not keep the Shabbat, because you did one of these negative commandments, you did not keep the Shabbat. So keeping the Shabbat is a positive commandment, right? If you don't keep the Shabbat, then the punishment is very bad. Truly, the way of not keeping the Shabbat.
The punishment bad for not keeping the Shabbat, or is the punishment bad for one of the prohibitions that you did that doesn't keep the Shabbat?
That's not keeping the Shabbat. There are 49 ways. It's like somebody gives you a diamond and somebody gives you a diamond and they say, protect this diamond. Don't scratch it. Don't rub it. Don't knock it. Don't throw it. Don't this. Right? And you do one of those things. So you didn't keep the diamond. It's true that this is one of the ways of not keeping it. Right?
When you're getting the reward for not keeping the Shabbos, you could have a reward for keeping the Shabbos that you're not getting.
But even
you're getting penalized for life of life.
You're getting penalized because. Okay, that's one of the ways of defiling the Shabbos. But the reward comes from keeping the Shabbos intact. That's the reward. It's very important that Jewish people and the world is not getting it. So there's two aspects. One is if you keep the Shabbat, right? Then you fix up the world, and also you attach to God. That's the two aspects that are in. That aspect of fixing up the world, we know the reward for it. The reward is consummate to the punishment. You see that the punishment was great for not keeping it. So therefore the reward must be great for yes keeping it. Right? Then there's the other aspect of keeping Shabbat, is that you connect it to God. This you cannot know the reward for. This is an essential, that's a schar mitzvah. You are connected to God. You know what that means? Nobody knows what it means. It's infinitely good. Right. On the other hand, the person that doesn't keep it, he's missing it. So that's the reward for keeping the commandment and the loss if you don't keep it. So one, you can calculate, namely the effect of the commandment on the world. And the same commandment, you cannot calculate. That's your connection to God. Therefore, it says, be careful in a heavy commandment. One second. Be careful in a heavy commandment as you are in a light commandment. What's a heavy commandment? Commandments, how they affect the world. In that, there is a reward and punishment that you can measure. But all the commandments are equal. It says, Ein ata yodea matan schara, that you don't know the reward of the commandments. That's talking about the other aspect of every commandment, namely, that they are the will of God. And they're all the same. You understand or no? You understand?
Yeah. My problem is Shabbos.
It says Nachala B'li Mitzorim. Like every commandment is the same. Listen. Every commandment is the same, and every commandment is different. The aspect that every commandment is the same, you cannot know the reward. Because why are they the same? Because they connect to God. The aspect that every commandment is different, you can know because of the punishment that you get if you don't keep the commandment or you defile the commandment.
If you don't keep Shabbos, it's sort of, it's not keeping the Shabbos, it's a thing that you're doing not to keep the Shabbos. That's the role.
That's not keeping Shabbos.
Yeah, but if you haven't kept Shabbos, you have made something better.
It's like you have to, a person has to love every Jew, right? Right. A person has to love every Jew. Instead of that, he takes a gun and shoots the guy in the head. Right? Now, is that called the opposite of loving a Jew? Certainly it is. But on the other hand, he did something wrong. He did a sin. You're not allowed to kill people. He did. But on the other hand, he's missing the commandment of loving another person. It's the same thing with Shabbat. When all the Jews keep the Shabbases, the Jews keep 2 Shabbases, that the world, Mashiach will come. What does it mean keep 2 Shabbases? Don't defile the Shabbos. How do you defile the Shabbos? What if a person on Shabbos, he does weightlifting on Shabbos? Is that defiling the Shabbos? No. What if a person lights a cigarette lighter? Is that defiling Shabbos? Yes. You know why? The guy lifted weights. He lifted 200 pounds. Right? He really worked out. Here's the thing you're not supposed to do. He did it for whatever reason. That's his enjoyment. It's not the spirit of Shabbos.
So you're saying that this reward for keeping Shabbos is, we don't know what the reward is.
On one hand, we don't know, and on the other hand, we do know. That aspect of Shabbos that connects to God, we don't know the reward. Like every commandment, we don't know the reward. On the other hand, that which Shabbos fixes up the world, we do know the reward. Therefore, it's possible to say, that's right. Therefore, it says, be careful in an easy commandment like a heavy one. That's talking about the external of the commandments. There's easy and heavy ones. And then it says, but you don't know the reward. That's talking about the internal of every commandment. Good? Thank you. God bless you. And we are going to go, I'm going to